In these times of uncertainty, it's all the more important that we keep collaborating, informing, and inspiring each other, so that we can be smarter and better tomorrow. Welcome to the Pakhuis de Zwijger livecast.
Good evening. On behalf of Pakhuis de Zwijger and the Wim Crowell Institute, I would like to welcome you to the 8th episode of It's All Graphic. My name is Jürgen Chonnefong and I will be your moderator tonight. In this program, we will speak to graphic designers who have developed new sets of skills, new toolkits, in addition to their graphic design practice. These multidisciplinary designers all use coding to visualize their designs. But the nice thing is that their medias are very different. From the dynamic letters of Mitch Paone to the ceramic tiles of Gilles de Brock to creative coding by Vera from the Seyp, who's joining us here tonight in the studio. A warm welcome to you, and you will present to us later on as well, right? Looking forward to that. And but we will also see the use of artificial intelligence and machine learning for the purpose of exploring the use of memory by Chris Core. And finally, we will learn more about the self-developed typography of our polite society. Why did the designers feel the urge to expand their toolkit? And why do many designers do that nowadays, if you compare that to before? They will tell us about that and more tonight. After a broadcast is finished, there's a possibility to chat with the designers. If you would like to do so, make sure that you go to the program page on the website of Pakhuis de Zwijger. There you can log in to Zoom, and there you see two functions, the chat function, so you can chat amongst each other, and that's where the chat with the designers will happen as well. And secondly, there's a Q&A function. If you'd like to pose a question to one of the designers, that is possible. Make sure that you mention who your question is directed to, so I can make sure that the right question ends up with the right designer. Right. Before we start with our presentations, I would like to give room for Roosje Klap. She's a graphic designer and a board member of the Wim Crowell Institute that curated this live cast in collaboration with Pakhuis de Zwijger. I would say, Roosje, the floor is yours.
Hello, thank you, Jurgen, and hello, audience. It's great that we're here together in a live cast, even though we're far apart. I'm a board member of the Wim Crowell Institute, and together with my colleagues, we curated this evening for you. At the Wim Crowell Institute, we're looking to make the history, the present, and also the future accessible of graphic designers and their legacies for educational purposes, but also just to everybody in the world around us, because as graphic designers, we know that graphic design is everywhere. I think it's really nice to be able to program this together with Pakhuis de Zwijger. We used to be together in real life, but now it's online, and we'll hope to see you later in the chat. So log in via Zoom, and now it's back to you, Jurgen.
Thank you so much, Roosje. That's a Euro Song Festival vibe going on. Back to you, me, back to me, Roosje. There we are. All right, and we will go to our first presenters. The first speakers were given the assignment to develop a new identity for the Wim Crowell Institute, and I understood that they are going to show us what they did. Please, a warm welcome to our polite society. Are you there, guys? There you are.
We're here.
The floor is yours.
Hi. Thank you.
We're here. You want to share your screen, Jens? We wrote this down. Jens is doing the slides, and I'm doing the talking. We're going to show you now 7 type design projects in 7 minutes. Last one is what we did for the Wim Crowell Institute. The first type design we ever made was for a project titled Concreet in 2011. It was a small commission, a poster, an invitation card, and a publication for a show at the Museum für Konkrete Kunst in Ingolstadt in Germany. Konkrete Kunst is a German term for the abstract minimalism by the likes of Max Bill, Richard Paul Lohse, and Josef Albers, works which are collected by this museum since the 1980s. The exhibition Concreet was infiltrating the museum collection and its dogmatic definitions in a light-hearted way. For the communication of the show, we also wanted to make a connection with the works in the collection and with the time in which they were made. We ended up working with Helvetica, representing the kind of typeface which was often applied in the context of concrete Kunst exhibitions back in the days. Based on the anchor points of Helvetica's glyphs, we designed new letter shapes by simply connecting them with straight lines. The resulting typeface is some sort of skeleton of Helvetica, which we called Grotesco. The next project is an exhibition design for the 2014 edition of the Prix de Rome for Architecture at the New Institute in Rotterdam. Thinking about the connection between typography and architecture brought us back to the origins of our letter forms, the Roman square capitals, which were chiseled directly into stone. There are several theories about the origin of the serif. One that states that it is the result of a hand movement at the end of a brush stroke, and another which explains the serif as a controlled mistake when the stone breaks off in the shape of a triangular corner at the moment that the chisel is turned 90 degrees to mark the end of a line. Focusing on the serif, we were trying to see how a digital version of such an error could look like. By drawing digital letters on a square and keeping all serifs and diagonals at an angle of 19 degrees strictly. The resulting typeface, which we called Capitalis Brutalis, was used for the exhibition and for a series of posters and invitation cards. Here you can see the alphabet and the white letters such as A, M, V, and W, which are caused by the 90-degree angles. The next typeface is a time capsule. While studying at the former Jan van Eyck Academy in Maastricht, we noticed signs like this one throughout the academy building, done in a particular hand lettering style. After some asking around, it turned out that they were the last remaining traces of the work of former janitor and painter Pierre Bonten, who was working at the academy throughout the 80s and 90s. In order to preserve this vanishing script, we invited Pierre to return to the academy and paint his alphabet one more time. Based on his drawings, we transferred the letter shapes into the computer, creating a digital version of Bontepike, as Pierre called his typeface. After digitizing it, we let it be for a while and eventually forgot about it. For us, the most important thing was to preserve it, not to use it. But then something curious happened. Some years after, we were contacted by the design studio that was in charge of developing a new graphic identity for the Van Eyck, as it was called now, and they asked us if they could use Bontepike for it. On this slide, you see the new entrance of the academy with Bontepike big on the facade. We thought it was beautiful that after all these years, Pierre's typeface resurfaced and now became the official visual voice of the institution. The next typeface is called Kapla. It's an improvised design that was made on the spot during a workshop which we organized at Extrapool in Nijmegen as part of a research project titled Our Form of Book in 2015. We used Lisitsky's About Two Squares as a starting point for a children's workshop about destruction and reconstruction. Among others, we used the famous Dutch Kapla building blocks as construction material during the workshop. And in the morning of the first day, we made a poster for the window of the gallery space to mark the entrance for the participants. It was stamped directly with the blocks, some kind of makeshift letterpress. A digital version of the typeface was later used for the project publication. We also designed two other typefaces for Our Form of Book. OPS Past Perfect for a chapter about the obsession with the imperfection of Riso printing, and used Future for a publication with advices for intellectual labor by Paul Otlet. When the Wim Crowell Institute asked us last year to think about a new graphic identity, we were interested in the different ideologies which manifest themselves through the works of the designers in the collection of the Institute. More particularly, we wanted to focus on the process of communication and the production of meaning in the flow of writing and the resulting shapes of language. The Wim Crowell Institute and the archive function as an interface between tradition and innovation, and we wanted to use typography as an element that can make the fluid connection of past, present, and future visible. A typeface in this sense is then not only a product of craftsmanship, but also a visual expression that arises from a specific situation and a moment in time. The shapes of letters can tell us something about the moment in which they have been conceived, about ideology, fashion, and the history of writing and typography. The foundation of our design proposal was then a custom typeface which makes references to this history by borrowing shapes from different moments in time. We called this typeface OPS Whim. Whim with an H, as in a sudden change of mind, especially one that is unusual or unexplained, something that falls out of time, making sense in retrospect. Think of Crowell's New Ugliness or Schrofer's proto-computer graphics. We designed 6 different weights, from light to black. The logo is created by writing the full name of the institute in all 6 weights of OPS Whim. As a secondary typeface, we introduced OPS Cubic from our facet typewriter research, which we published last year, and in which Crowell has made a short appearance as well. We thought of it as an identity that could be applied with a word processing program such as Microsoft Word. The typeface is simply used to write things down. This is the template for the poster, which starts with the name at the top of the page. Writing down or listing information is the basic design principle. A vertical grid is created by a series of tablatures. Then content is filled in. Hierarchies are created by order, tablature, and type size. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for your presentation. There's a question I would like to ask. It's from your bio. We read there, their self-initiated work investigates how typographic form mirrors social phenomena. That's quite specific, but quite dense as well. Can you explain what you mean by that?
Well, I think many of our type design projects especially are about time. So very often we're looking at a very specific moment or context, and we start from there. So let's say that dialogue or conversation that follows from that then often relates, in a way, typographic form to, the historical context or a moment in time. And everything that connects to it.
And more in practice, can you explain how the identity that you designed for the Wim Crowell Institute, to what social phenomena does that connect?
Yeah, I would say all the social phenomena that are present in the archive, in the collection that the Wim Crowell Institute is taking care of. Let's say all the designers that are represented in there, all the works that are in this archive, they all tell us something about the time in which they have been made. And that's something that we find really interesting. In a way, that's where we started talking.
Right. And it was a conscious decision not to copy Wim Crowell, but to design something completely new, if I understood correctly, right?
Yeah, I think it's also technology situation now where we can collect all these visual references in a typeface also in a way that as a collection or as a font file, in a way where we think it's interesting to use that technology also now for this identity.
Right. Well, thank you so much for your presentation, and we're very much looking forward to the new identity of the Wim Crowell Institute, how it's going to be used and how it's going to be applied. But thank you so much for your presentation now.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. We will go on to our second presentation, and that is by Vera, who is joining us here in the studio. Vera, if I understood correctly, recently you graduated cum laude with honors from the Leiden University as a Master of Media Technology, where you investigated artificial intelligence and in specific GAN technology. What is GAN technology?
Generative Adversarial Network, but you can just say GAN. It makes it easier. It
makes it easier to pronounce. Yeah. Well, I would say for your presentation, the floor is yours as well.
Thank you. Okay, so I prepared 26 different snippets of projects, basically in ABC, with fragments of my work. And I couldn't really summarize me working with code because it's pretty much all my practice. So there we go. Okay, so I just talked already about media technology. This is a project I did there together with Seyp Paris, where I basically went there to learn how to program better. And this was a really helpful project where we visualized the database of Rijksmuseum in 3 dimensions, so adding an extra skill to filter. This is a project I did together with Michael Chia. And this was actually the first project I did use. I made use of a GAN, so a generative adversarial network. But as you can see, the quality was still quite small. We made these face textures. But it was still a good start. This is a snippet I just wanted to show because we're here at the Wim Krauw Institute. A lot of my inspiration comes from older Dutch designers and artists. Basically, this is, for instance, the work of Karel Martens, but then it's processing. And this is some visuals. So I work as a freelance graphic designer. These are some visuals that I did for The Correspondent, which is a Dutch news article. And here the challenge was actually making the file really small. So the dimensions were really large, so 1920 by 1080, but they had to be under, I think, 10 MB or something. It was a fun challenge. And this is part of a workshop that I did together with students of the Critical Inquiry Lab at the Design Academy Eindhoven. And we actually, it was a collaborative project where we made a typeface kind of with a technique called exquisite corpse. So everyone made some shapes and together we made a typeface out of it. And this is actually quite new. So this is the identity for a symposium taking place on December 11th at the KBK. And this whole identity, I already do it for a few years and it's almost automatic. So I take the text of the researchers and basically extract images from that and make a narrative out of it. Here's some posters. So this is actually the project that I graduated with at the Media Technology Master. It's also a project I'm still working on. I'm developing further, but this was part of the results of my actual thesis. So and this is a project I did together with Dora Kergesh, who's also a graphic designer, and this was basically was an exhibition for creative coding community in Utrecht called CCU. So we only use processing for all the visuals and everything. It was pretty challenging, but also really fun. And this is the, as you've been seeing, I'm going from A to B to C and so on, but this is Y and J, so I kind of cheated a bit. But this is...
the Dutch, to copy the Dutch I, the river, right.
And I think it's also very classy. So this is a view from the building where my studio is in. So it's not work, but it's still part of my studio. This is a project I did for the Kunsthal together with Yara Veloso. And here we did this for Poetry International. It's a Dutch, but international also, organization for poetry. And they have a festival each year. And last year they basically made us, or let us respond to 3 poems. And we tried to make a different medium out of them. So the one on the left is a chatbot, part of the poem. The one in the middle is some visuals, and the one on the right is actually a poem generated by Twitter users.
Oh.
So that was really fun. This is a part of something I'm working on now. So I've continued with working with guns, specifically the style gun. And I'm working now on a script, basically a tool in which I can animate from letter to letter instead of just randomly. So on the left you see what it was before, and on the right you see where it's kind of going. It's not there yet, but it will be, hopefully. I also teach. This is just a nice image that I made for one of the courses. I teach in Artes.
What do you teach? What subject do you teach?
Digital media, so that's why there's an M. It's basically coding and other stuff. This actually really reminded me of the identity we saw, although it's a completely different turn. So this is a variable font for the Nederlandse Galerie Associatie, which is basically Dutch Gallery Association. It's a project still in progress with, I do it together with Michael Chia. And basically we animate from one very reference font to another one. So we chose some styles from Juriaan Schroever, who we also heard about, and also the Amsterdamse School. Oh. And we're also creating patterns with it. This image is not so pretty, but yeah. I also do workshops. So this is, for instance, one visual that I did to promote a workshop at the KBK. And this is actually, I think, my first kind of code project, although it was analog. I did it together with Amir Houya and Gabor Kerekesh. And we were acting like the machine, so it was a really good start.
And what is that, acting like the machine?
So we gave each other rules that we had to follow, and we had some freedom, but not that much. And basically, we had this process in which we made all the things that we did for this project, which was a poster series. And okay, I'm going on. This is the Q. I couldn't find a project for Q, but this was Quarantine Relief. So basically, this was a project that I made together with Michael Chia as well. It was a website for an exhibition when the museums were opening again.
Right.
I'm almost there, bear with me. These are some visuals that I made during a residency in Vienna, which I did in October, which was pretty weird because there was a pandemic, but it was also really awesome. This is a poster and a grid system that becomes less and less legible for the KBK. I'm almost there. Here you see actually my animation tool in action for another identity. It's a pretty long video. And here you see the first time I worked with shaders, also the only time. I think shaders are really difficult for Upsami. This was a VJ tool that I made also during media technology, which really made me understand physics. So it was a really fun project to do. And this is a W. This is a XYZ. This was my first variable font. Not so pretty, but yeah. This is the Y for why did I think electronics were fun. But the project was actually really fun. But the electronics and liquids don't mix. It's a long story.
Electronics and liquids don't mix. I think there's a very deep knowledge behind that.
Yeah. And this is the last slide. So here you see actually my studio.
That's where you work.
Yeah.
Right.
I work together in a collective called Zesbaan, so we're all together in this space.
Nice.
Yeah, that was it.
Well, thank you so much.
Yeah.
I wondered, because I heard through the grapevine that you don't use Adobe programs like Photoshop or InDesign, which for a designer is quite special, I understood. What do you use instead, and why don't you use the regular program, so to speak?
So I use them now very rarely, but just actually, I never make anything in it. I just export or convert things in it. I think it's really interesting to understand why things work a certain way, or how some form of animation or a system works. So I want to be able to do that myself and control it fully. So I do a lot in processing, for instance. It's a very popular software to learn how to program, but actually, I'm still using it. I'm also still learning, so yeah.
And by understanding, it's not only the case of understanding it, but controlling it as well, because I can imagine that after you understood it, you can use, the regular programs, but still, that's a step you don't make yet.
Yeah, it really helps, I think, to also come up with new ideas for me, and also to understand the world around me better, which not maybe just a part of it.
Yeah. And are you aware of the developments that are happening within the technological side? Are you keeping track with that, and decide not to use it, or is that something that doesn't interest you at all?
You mean new technological developments? Or?
Yeah, and new programming, the possibilities that new programming can give.
Yeah, so I cherry pick the ones that I find more interesting. So, for instance, guns. Was developed in 2014, I think, the first one.
Yeah.
But then not everything, because there's so much.
Yeah.
Just a selection.
Great. Well, thank you so much for your presentation.
Thank you.
Got the feeling that we can talk a lot longer about this, but it's packed with a lot of presentations.
Yes.
And the next person to present is Mitch Paone. Mitch recently moved from the busy New York to the calm Lake of Geneva in Switzerland. That is quite a change. And what stayed the same was the exciting and kinetic typefaces that jump all over the place. Mitch, are you there?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you loud and clearly.
Perfect.
The floor is yours.
All right. Cool. Is my screen up? Everybody good?
Yeah.
Cool. All right. So I know I got a very short period of time to pack out a lot of information. But to get into the talk, I really just want to talk about all of the influences and research and stuff that goes into the work. I'm not really going to get into a specific project per se. But really, I think for me, it's less about technology and innovation and stuff, but I think it's really about connecting a lot more things outside of graphic design that influence the practice itself. So it's important to sort of, I think, get to know me a little bit. So I think my background is actually, I'm a jazz piano player and a musician way before my training as a designer. And I think understanding this, sort of creating some parallels of music composition and performance back into the design practice itself. So this idea of like what input and output and improvising, really what's happening right now. So I'm basically improvising right now because I've not scripted this talk or anything. I'm just kind of making stuff when I see these screens. So to me, it's life experience, the theory and research practice, kind of all your interests coming together at that point in time when you make something or create something. And then there's this sort of point of results, and then you can reflect on the things that you made. But really, I think it's important for me and our studio really to define, to be very interested in this kind of being able to make stuff without having to be too concerned about the outcome. So I'm going to get into the input about that. So, what sort of makes our work the way it is. So started back in 2009, my wife and I, Meg, opened the studio. It's been through a lot of transformation since then. This is our greater team. So there's Daniel and Deanna. This is back when we were in New York. And then our dog, Layla, super important for moral support. And I think it's also important to think that the way we work is really extended. So we bring on specialists in specific areas to help produce specific projects. So like a type designer, an illustrator, animators, coders, depending on the specific project we work on, they onboard onto our studio. So that's how we're sort of able to manage some pretty large scale projects. So like I said, like music really is my foundation. And I think when people understand that and start to dissect their work and think about our work, it really becomes quite clear on how things sort of connect. So, and also around the same time when I was young, I was exposed to, the Neville Brody and then the, David Parsons of the world. So as like a skater punk in the US, you're reading Trans World magazine and stuff. So aesthetically, I started to become very drawn in design. And at the same time, I discovered the music of Herbie Hancock and Wayne Shorter when I was, I think, in high school. And at that point kind of knew, okay, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to study music and I'm going to go in a path to study design at a parallel path at a very young age. So those two things really kind of set in stone and still to this day sort of run a very big foundation in how we work. So, kind of looking at this material at a young age and kind of being inundated with this sort of design style within, jazz music and different record covers at that point in time, you can see how that influence kind of settled into sort of our aesthetic preference of the studio and how we work. Me playing a jam session. Oh gosh. So now you know that I'm a musician, so got through that. Now you're looking at zebras. But this idea of identity to us, and I think myself, is beyond this idea of like what graphic form is. I think, you know, you start to really think about much larger things that influence possible work. So like for me, how rhythm in music, in dance and choreography, all of these things that are very much part of different artistic disciplines come in and very much influence how we work. And it's also interesting if you look at the zebra as a very specific character with the stripes and all of this stuff. Really the conditions that evolution made this very interesting creature in that very specific place. So you start to think there's so much at hand to create something so specific. So I think, you know, bringing that together becomes very interesting. So getting into animation and design, there's like fundamental principles in nature. And this is sort of a term that we coined with our work, this idea of kinetic identity. What makes that? So obviously physics, you have, you know, forces of nature, magnetism, you know, gravity, all of these things that are very natural us to see, you know, and we deal with every day. But when we apply it into the context of animation design, it becomes very real. And so finding reference in this material and bringing it back into the projects that we're doing or trying to emulate or prototype that stuff gives us some like fundamental foundation in reality that we can kind of augment the work with. And then I think what's also interesting, all these behaviors can be really boiled down into formulas and different structures and systems that then we can sort of produce specific identity to through movement. And this gets more and more interesting when you start to apply this to more things. Like animals have mechanical structures based on their bones and sort of characters and rigging. And if you look at the work of like Edward Muybridge, for example, just sort of the looping horse gets very dynamic, very different in every sort of still image, but there you fundamentally know it's a horse by the underlying movement and mechanics of the structure. So that sort of system, which can be sort of made, is always sort of loose and improvisational, but also very tight and consistent at the same time. So it's this kind of mix between flexibility and rigidity that I'm quite fascinated with. So there's so many different examples of this. So, and this is what I'm saying, like the references can be so wild and wacky. And then you're like, oh, you know, how does a turtle walk, or how does a caterpillar move, or how does a elephant move? But you see how we can start to think about formal connections into movement through everything in a way. And that's, I find quite fascinating to get into this kind of stuff and see what we can translate into movement. It's like a very early example of, you know, just even the spacing between the typography, it relates to sort of an easing behavior is no different from the spacing of how to caterpillar walk. So these are very early tests that we were doing, I mean, 3 or 4 years ago. Just at a certain point, we were just like taking behaviors and applying it to typography and design elements to see what would happen. And it kind of just, I think, amplified how we work. So I think when it came together to think about my musical background, how dance and choreography and rhythm comes into play. And you look at, I'm gonna pause this for a second so it stops playing. But if you look at specific dance, you have a very strict like a foundation of rhythm that's there that allows you to sort of improvise and sort of play on top of it, but within a structure. And I think, you know, that sort of human creativity applied to rhythm is a very fascinating thing to really sort of see what we can do within a design context. This is actually second line dance from New Orleans. So even there's like cultural associations with it as well. And even ballet, and this goes on and on. And what I find fascinating about choreography specifically is that this idea that the performer has to be so concentrated and so focused that there's always a beautiful form, and no matter what point in time it's happening. So you can capture an image, and it always has sort of a beautiful, elegant structure to it. And that goes back into this idea of improvisation and performance, being very concentrated in that moment, and etc. A good example is the Jabberwockies. You can see them sync up with the music really well. I'm going to try to move a little faster. So, and so think about this, just like this very simple thing. You know, this is if anybody's studied music, one measure is 4 beats, 1, 2, 3, 4. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. So these are on the downbeat. If I do on the upbeat, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. So fundamentally, humans feel rhythm differently depending on where the accent of the notes are. So I think for us, if we can think about these structures based on on time, like 30 seconds, you have 30 frames a second in film, and you're dealing with this subdivision of time, we can do the same thing with animation in a way to generate how we would actually compose music. So this is a waltz for 1, 2, 3, 2, 2, 3, 1, 2, 2, 2, 2, 3. So you can feel, even though it's just this, just how we decide to accent the notes gives us a feeling of something different. And I think that's fascinating that the human body actually reacts to this. So theoretically, I think through animation, you can generate a similar kind of emotional feel through the work that I find quite fascinating. So I kind of see this applied to... So there's always a like rhythmic structure in the underpinning of a lot of our projects. And I think we try to even find conceptual connections to why we would create that sort of rhythmic structure. So you see that when you see the work, you'll definitely see there's some sort of beat, some sort of groove. And it's exactly how I would be composing a piece of music. So this other sort of examples of, this is actually notation for dance. This is Laba notation. And it's a dance, it's like an informal like dance notation process. It's really beautiful stuff within this kind of work. I'm going to keep moving through here. Just some other references of this idea of playing with time and form. Just going to keep moving. And so here's an example. So like this is a piece we did, and then sort of going back to the MyBridge reference, this is just sort of a lift of some generative thing that we built. And then we caught that image at that point in time that we thought that was the most engaging piece. And then again, so building this kind of animated structure that has a rhythmic quality to it, and then moving it into these other assets. So if you build this kind of very flexible system through the work. So I think now we're in this sort of period of time where, you know, we have screens, technology, different formats to work in, that we have to sort of look at technology as a way to sort of augment the work and bring it into the context of where the communications are going to live. So here's some examples of sort of trying different things in AR or 360 camera. And so we have to approach design a bit differently in this context. And what I mean is that I think basically, you know, you have to create new instruments and new ways to work to tackle new ways of communicating. And I think this is the same thing that's happened through music. You know, if you look at like an organ that's done from like 500 BC, it gets transformed to a harpsichord, which has a similar sound, but the harpsichord only plays one level of volume. So the piano is created to create expression, and then we have synthesizers, then we have hardware instruments, then we're in software instruments. So you see how the transformation of technology can impact the creative direction of actually building new instruments to do that. So I think we're in a point now where, you know, we can use tools and create tools using code, create generative tools using, you know, whether it's open frameworks, processing, JavaScript, to then produce a lot of these work for us. So these are some examples from projects that we've done. And just creating these things that really couldn't do in Adobe software, animation software that can automate and speed up tasks really fast. So here's some more stuff like that. So it's just kind of the final thing I want to get into, and I'm just going to show a quick reel of the work and then I'll be finished, is that the idea that there is kind of a fundamental design practice in here. So like type design really gives this sort of sensibility of negative space and craftsmanship, and it's very slow in comparison of creating stuff that's generative. And this is also sort of a counterpoint to a lot of the work that you see, you know, that's very hype and, you know, animated and fast. With slow design, I would say, you know, you're working on typeface for 4 or 5 years. Let's see. And so you take all that stuff up. I think, you know, you get an understanding from my background, understanding of music and typography and design. And this is kind of the result of that. So here you go.
Yeah, philosophy, hypothesize meditation. Reminisce on my wonder years, and I wonder, yeah. Sentiments of my words ain't been so sincere. The sentiment to my nerve that I just persevere. The big thought of falling off disappear to my faith. They say their head is real. Analyze my demise, I say I'm super anxious. Recognize I deprive this feeling, then embrace it. Vandalizing these walls only if they can talk. Conversations on contemplate to my dark thoughts. Looking down on my soul now. Tell me I'm in control now. Tell me I can live long and I can live wrong and I can live right and I can sing song and I can unite with you that I love, you that I like. Look at my life and tell me I fight. This that final destination. This that fonts of information. This that fonts of inspiration. This that crack the installation. This that quantum jumping, that fist pumping, that bomb detonation. Please don't bomb my nation. And bomb me flew awaken. I got my control when I'm here. You gon' hate me when I'm gone. Ain't no blood pumping, no fear. I got hope inside of my bone. This that life beyond your own life. This ain't physical for mankind. This that out of body experience. No coincidence, you been died. It's your shit.
So I think I have like 1 minute left. So like I said, moved to Switzerland. Now really focus on education and a lot of the research stuff. So I teach, I'm very focused in my cheese consumption. But so kind of bringing this into the classroom and connecting music like sound and movement and visual form all into sort of a practice has been quite interesting. And actually did a workshop with Bosha at Kavaka too a couple years ago as well. So she got a little bit of a taste of that. And here's some examples from the workshops. This is from the Masters of Type Design at ECAL. This is last year, sort of bringing type specimens to life. And then, so just to conclude, so I say, what is connected concepts that relate to the passage of time using visual systems created by the means of animation, behaviors, or computation? I think for me, it's like anything you can possibly use besides Adobe, essentially to amplify the work, and use Adobe, whatever, it doesn't really matter. Just anything you can do to kind of push the work in a certain way. And I think really thinking about time and movement is important. And I think this idea that we used to just make posters and then try to animate them and interact with them to me is kind of crazy. So I think for us, it's just like whatever we can do as a starting point. If we start with a break dancer and apply that to typography, that could be the output of a possible project, or you could draw a typeface. There is no rules. So, and I think, this idea that we're always constantly learning, trying new things, and we have to do that to stay along with sort of the technological advances and stuff too. So I think it's nice to, almost be like a baby looking around at the world and without any judgment. And I think to conclude the idea of improvisation, that kind of sense of like concentration, you kind of lose this critical point of view, this comparative thing, all of these sort of expectations go away and you're just sort of making something. And I think for me, that's one of the most important things of all of this is just finding that space to be able to do that comfortably. So yeah, I don't know if I have time, but I'll just let these guys.
Are you trying to relate to them that feeling? What's your intent?
Well, actually,
this is Wayne Shorter and
the intent now is to throw away and kind of put away everything that was learned, the studied stuff. Again, I always refer, because Miles is the only one that would talk like this. He'd say, Wayne, he said, hey, Wayne, do you ever feel like you want to play, he said, you want to play like you don't know how to play? And then he said, do you feel like you'd like to play music that doesn't sound like music? That doesn't sound, I know it's right. Familiar. And I have a tape of Charlie Parker giving a lesson, and the student says, Mr. Parker, I have to learn all these scales, memorize all these scales? And Bird said, yes, and after you finish learning them, forget them.
Right. Play as if you don't know all of that stuff, or you're not playing a scale, but you're playing straight from the heart.
Yeah.
That's beautiful.
All right.
Right.
That's it.
Thank you so much. That was amazing, Mitch. And the presentation made me very, very happy. You went a little bit over time, so officially we don't have any time for a question, but there's still a question I would like to pose to you still, because what you explained magnificently is how music influenced your design. Is it also the case that your design influences your music as well? A very short answer, please.
Yeah, 100%. Everything is connected and intertwined. So there's.
Can you describe how?
How? I mean, I think you just look at layering of things. You know, you think about I'm playing a certain chord, it creates a certain color or shape. You know, the emotional sort of expression of music, we talk through actual visual references, and then vice versa. When you talk about visual or animation, you actually say, hey, can you make it go whoosh, or pop or duck? You describe the work in musical terms when you talk about how things move. So there's humans, we have to sort of connect them in some way to make it make sense, I guess.
Great. And combine that with a beginner's mind. Well, thank you so much, Mitch. I thoroughly enjoyed the presentation. Thank you so much. Bye-bye. There have been a lot of questions asked through Zoom, but we're saving those questions for the chat afterwards. So you can you can speak to all the designers in the Zoom chat, and then the questions that you post will be asked there as well. Let's, without any further ado, go to our next presentation, and that is Chris Core, because the graduation work of Chris Core surprised both philosophers, developers, and designers, and put her immediately on the map of design and tech. I would like to ask Chris, are you there?
I'm here.
A very warm welcome to you. We can hear you loud and clear, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Chris. I'm a multidisciplinary artist and designer. I'm very much interested in exploration of ever-changing mediated reality and sides of our technological nature. This also influences directly my design practice from both conceptual and practical sides. I graduated from KBK graphic design last year with the project Amnesia, which is focused on the concept of the human hybrid memory that can be augmented, influenced, and modified by AI. This project, I wanted to prompt a discussion about evolving algorithms that can be trained on our online photos, can fill in the memory gaps by creating fake memories that are plausible enough to be perceived as real. This seems quite fantastic and futuristic concept, but it's already can be found in the way that social media algorithms learn our online behavior, process the data in the new cameras with ability in AI, brain-computer interfaces, and all this interesting stuff. So on the next slide, you can see a small part, like the triggers of diving me for exploring this topic. Vera already mentioned about GANs, but this is like a small dumb picture of what it is actually. So now they're quite popular and a lot of people working with them, but back then it was like almost 2 years ago. And for machine learning world, it's like quite a lot. So it was quite fascinating and shocking for me. So basically, in short, these are algorithms created by Ian Goodfellow, who became also part of Amnesia project. And it is algorithms that by training on a big data sets of images, sounds, or texts, they are able to create fake or like machinery content that can trick our sense organs and in a way of perceiving what is real. So Amnesia project consists of the 2 parts. On the next slide, you can see the first one, which is conceptual and theoretical based. And it's about like my research. It exists in the form of the website. There are a few screenshots of it because during my research, I also contacted tech philosophers, computational neuroscientists, machine learning researchers, and artists working with AI. And all these conversations was really crucial to hide. So I compiled it into a nonlinear interview discussing all this topic from different sides. And the second part of the project was my personal artistic vision of how AI can recall and fulfill on the human memories. So on the next slides, you can see how the video installation looked like that I created. Yeah, so it was a big video installation that was presented at KBK, but there are also like on the next slides, it traveled a bit aside to different venues and festivals later. So the formats should change a bit, but it was also interested to moderate it. And I would also like to show you a short piece of it to understand it a bit better what I'm talking about, which is basically one full hybrid memory cycle out of 8, but I built them all with the same principle. And you can see it on the next slide, please.
I remember a triceratops with a quail. I remember rock crab and a spoonbill, an American coot. I remember the bull mastiff and the toy poodle too. I remember cricket and a tiger beetle with the coho. I remember carousel in a grocery store and a clog. I remember a lawnmower and a harvester too. I remember holster in a mailbox. I remember a tank and a parachute too. I remember a lampshade, nails, and a rubber eraser. I remember the Model T and a pickup in front of a mosque. I remember zucchini and jackfruit in a hot pot. I remember the washer and a vending machine. I remember a pot pie and rapeseed in the Alps.
So as you've seen, it's just one memory cycle, as I described before. So the video is also divided in two parts. The first one was the morphing images, is when AI tries to recall and visualize the memory. And the second one is when it searches for the real photo memory back into the data set. So to create this video, I worked only with an open source tools in purpose, and I use a pre-trained GAN model on a dataset ImageNet that consists out of 14 million images and 1,000 categories of like random stuff from cats to guns. And the second part is a kind of a mathematical collage you can see on the next slide on the left. So with the use of the GAN breeder, it's like an abstract picture built from the combination of all the code memories you can see before. And
oh, we seem to lose the connection with Chris. We'll try to solve that in a bit. That's a pity. We'll try to solve that in a bit. Maybe she can finish her presentation later on. Oh, no, you're back. Can you hear us? Yeah, we can hear you again. Can you hear us as well?
Am I freezing or something?
Yeah, you were freezing. And now we are probably freezing on your side. And now you're freezing again. What we're trying to do is to solve the problem technically as well. And maybe Chris can return, or else, if all else fails, she will have to do the remaining part of her presentation in the chat. That's going to happen afterwards. I think that I'll take the opportunity now to introduce our last speaker to you all. And that's Gilles de Brock. Living in Antwerp and a lover of mountains, this designer and programmer is developing a whole new craft, and it combines do-it-yourself with printing techniques. Say what? To tell us a little bit more about that, I would like to give the floor to Gilles de Brock. Gilles, are you there? Nobody's there now. Oh yeah, Gilles, I can see you. No, that's Mitch. Well,
kind of karaoke.
It's kind of exciting what happens now. Usually it goes very well.
Can you hear me now, right?
Yes. Gilles, are you there?
Yeah, super sorry. Actually, like a total noob, I forgot to unmute.
Oh, right. I understood you did something with computers as well, but it's great that you unmuted now. I would say the virtual floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you for that great introduction. I bet Roosje Klap was responsible for that mountain lover part, and it's also coincidentally why I envy Dia so much for being in the mountains constantly. So I am currently a graphic designer, and I turned into a tile maker more or less. And I'm going to start by showing you some of the graphic design work I did. And wait, the arrows don't work. So this is some of the graphic design work I did, and I'm going to show you 3 series and see if you can spot a trend. So this is the second one, and this is the third one. And besides the fact that they're all sort of visual and full of colors, there's also a shrinking type situation going on. So in this last series, the type is still there, but it's actually only 8 points. So it's shrunk a lot. And that's because during the making of all these posters, I really started to look at these designs more as surfaces that tell little small stories that I can work with. So that led to me wondering, like, if those surfaces that I make, that those small visual story surfaces, if I can also apply them to other things. So I started off by making what I think like is kind of basic, like silk scarves, like you can digitally print on silk, and a lot of people are doing it, and it's a lot of fun. And because it's digital print, what's a lot of fun to me is that you can have every design be different. And that's a limitation that, like that's a freedom that you don't have in most versions of print. But in digital print, you have this freedom. And in my practice, I think it's really important that you always control the design, or that the design be influenced by the medium that you work with. So for example, when I can do everything different, I feel like I sort of need to do everything different as well. And the next thing that happened in my practice is that I saw this show by Jordan Wolfson. And I realized while I was sitting here on this carpet looking at this video installation, that I always thought of myself that the video in this scenario would be the place where I tell my story or make my work. But in this exhibition, the carpet is very influential too. And I sort of realized, like, maybe I'm looking at this from the wrong angle and I should make carpets instead. And that started something in my practice, that I started making carpets. And I, of course, had no idea how to do that. And I just started Googling and YouTubing and figured out like how to do all these things, watched like 1 million hours of woodworking videos on YouTube and learned all these new skills. And that formed another important part of my practice, that I realized that I really like to learn new skills. And I see this as a very important part of my practice as well. And also to keep it entertaining for myself. So in order to make carpets, you also need to dye a lot of wool. So I started YouTubing how to do that, and then figuring out how to do that on a small industrial scale. This is in Roos's studio, and I made it very dirty, but I cleaned it up later. So she forgave me, I think. But while I was doing that, there was a lot of time waiting for these dyes to work. And that got me wondering and got me very curious about how these dyes actually work. And that curiosity was a lot of the fun in this process of painting this wool for me. And I think that curiosity is also therefore a very important part of my practice. And you can really see it in a lot of my works, or especially in the tile works now. So these are the completed carpets. You can also see one behind me probably. They're not very important to this story in terms of what they visually are, of what they look like, but they are important because after I made these carpets, I was completely exhausted because it's a lot of physical work, and I was at the show where they were shown, and I took the train home. And I remember thinking really simply, like, what about ceramics? Like, maybe I can do ceramic surfaces. It must be easy to make ceramic tiles and just add my visuals to those. So that was something that I had in the back of my mind, and mostly because I always, when I went to an arts and crafts store, I saw these brilliant, vibrant color samples of glazes, and specifically the ones with the effects in them always really made me envy ceramic artists, because I think it's really interesting to work with those. So projects came along, and a client asked me to think with them about how to design a dinner experience, which sounds a bit obnoxious, but it was fun at the time. And we designed this for them. And on the table, you can also see that there's plates. And I saw this is my big chance to like run into the ceramic world and do all this stuff with them. And this was going to be the start. But this was actually very underwhelming, because I think this way of reproducing ceramic glaze in a print on a ceramic object is not very interesting. And I kind of hoped that I was going to be like crazy, amazing ceramic glaze guy like this person here with all those amazing experiments. But this was actually very underwhelming, and that made me very sad. But luckily, I realized that I'm a bit like, all of those things that I named before about my practice could come in handy here, because I could just figure out how to do this myself. So I mean, how hard can it be to just apply ceramic glaze to ceramic objects? And at this time, I had no idea how to do any of those things. And so I just started at the beginning, which was in my case 3D modeling. So I learned about engineering more or less. And this is an attempt at a spraying nozzle. And I learned about modern production techniques that are very easily accessible. And I just started making machines. And I learned about how to control them. Like, I like to think of these as the muscles of my Frankenstein machine. And then how to work with microchips to control the electrical signals that go to those engines. And I just took it step by step. And worked it all out. And then from there on, I came into how you actually talk to a little microchip like that, like what kind of instructions can you translate to movement of a machine. Turned out to be G-code. Then I just had to make G-code from the designs that I make, which turned out to be not the easiest part, but totally doable as well, because of course, most designers nowadays can program. So I just wrote this software that translates images into G-code that can then be understood by the machine. So more or less, this is the bridge between my designs and the machine itself. And then you end up with something like this. So this is all of that together, the controlled movement of the machine and following the instructions and putting my design on this piece of paper here. And it was great, but I was still not really happy. I didn't put the sad cat in again because it made me cry almost looking at that thing. But as I said in my practice, I like to be really directed by the medium that I work with into to make the design decisions for me. And when you work with silkscreen printing, you're very limited in what you can do, and that helps me because otherwise you have a completely blank canvas that you can do everything on. But if you have a medium telling you can't do this and this and this, and then it's easy. You can just do whatever is left and you work with that and you make a design, which is a lot of fun to me. But with this machine, the situation had completely changed because now the machine was giving me limitations, but every time I ran into limitations by the machine, I had to wonder, like, is this a limitation of the medium? But since I'm the designer of the medium, does that mean I can I just change the medium? So it's always a question of, is it a bug or a feature? And do I solve this in a design strategy, or do I solve this in like an engineering strategy, or like in the coding part? There were so many parts where I could influence the design. So I had a very hard time coming up with designs for this machine. And what you saw in the last slides are some sketches of that process taking place. And then, of course, I was going to do ceramics, which is, I guess, what this whole thing is about. And I was doing that. Some small adoptions to the machine allowed me to put ceramic glaze in there and spray that on ceramics. And something like this would happen. So this is actually the tile on the right is before and after baking. And as you can see, the two tiles here, they're both sort of the same glaze, but the way they responded to the heat of the oven is completely different. And no matter what I tried, I just couldn't figure out how to get control over that. And so it really bumped me out. So I also learned then and there that I definitely also underestimate things, because this whole thing had taken me already 2 years or maybe longer, and it still wasn't even close to working. So I just took the next step. I mean, if you have a problem, you just break it up into small problems and you solve those. So my next problem was the ceramic glaze, and started figuring out how to make glazes. And this is a glazing recipe, which is, is what they typically look like. And that's all fine. But seriously, like, what is potash feldspar? Like, I had no idea. So it was time for some professional help. Also, because when you start Googling things like, is chrome oxide poisonous? You kind of know that you need to get some professional help with the materials that you're working with, because you're going to kill yourself maybe. I like to think of that ceramic glaze recipe sort of, it always reminds me of things like Harry Potter terms like potash feldspar. And what you can see then on the left here would be, in that analogy, my little basement room underneath the staircase. And then on the right is Hogwarts, which is in this case actually the European Ceramic Work Center, or the AKWC. And I went there and to get some professional help with these issues that I've had. And of course, then you also have all these chemicals readily available to you. And that helped me a lot. And slowly and surely, these sort of recipes started to make sense to me. And I started to come up with this library of my own glazes that worked for the purposes that I had. And I started professionalizing the whole process around me to make it all happen more streamlined. And then slowly but surely, some reliable results started to come out of the machine, which made me very happy. And still to this day, I really enjoy watching this machine work. And again, completely new limitations that the machine gave me and the glaze gave me. So again, my design strategy had to change completely. So looking at these designs, they're completely different from what I did, what I showed you in the beginning. They're way more minimal, and it's like a really low resolution inkjet printer that prints ceramic glaze. And so I put them next to each other here, so you can sort of see, like, what the differences in visual approaches are depending on the medium that I work with. I think it's interesting because I always like to think of the way that I design, that I have a certain style, or in my head, I think I do, but actually I don't really, because when I make a silkscreen print, it's completely different from when I make ceramic tiles, even though they're both like using a lot of colors, and they're not, well, they're kind of loud, I guess. They're completely different. And that brings me to the last point of my practice, which is actually just a picture of a stack of ceramic tiles. And the big thing is that I've been showing all these tiles with frames around them, but actually that's not at all what I want to do, because when I was thinking about ceramic tiles and making them, I was thinking about doing giant spaces, and I looked at them as like a interior surface product, or something that you can apply and you can put in a room or in a bathroom or a kitchen. So that's the next final thing that I think is important about my practice, is that as a designer, I just really like to believe I can do whatever I want, and I just go wherever it's fun to me. And as long as I can sort of get back to my graphic designer coding skills to make money from time to time, I can actually do whatever I want, whenever I want, as long as I don't get bored. And that's more or less it. And I guess this picture is not exactly what I envision when I think about my tiles as an interior product, but I wouldn't mind having a domain name like tileking.com or Tegelgigant if I have to.
Thank you so much, Mr. Tile King.
Wait, I'm going to stop sharing this so I can hear you better.
Great. Thank you for your presentation. I think the cat picture was a highlight. You recognized that cat, didn't you?
Yeah, it's yeah, I recognize it.
You're quite familiar with the work of Gilles. Is there a question you would like to ask him?
What's going to be your next thing, and is it also going to be toxic?
Well, I'm really trying hard to take any of the new ideas that I have and sort of numb them a little bit to finish this one that I'm currently still on, and maybe finish something once.
Finish something. Is that a carpet behind you that you made yourself as well?
Yes, it is, yes.
I think that is amazing. So keep on, I hope you keep on doing that as well and add the tiles to that. But thank you so much for your presentation for now.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Okay. As we said, the presentations of the designers will continue the conversation in the chat afterwards, and there Chris will hopefully finish her presentation as well. Hopefully we can restore the connection. We went a bit over time, but thank you so much to all the designers. Is there something that stood out for you tonight? There's something that you got inspired with or were surprised of?
All of it is really amazing. I thought it was a really nice combination.
Mm-hmm. But that's the political correct answer. I wouldn't have one specific thing.
I mean, I really like the cat meme, but I don't think that was the highlight.
Maybe that's
for me.
Maybe that's a source of inspiration in future. Well, again, thank you so much. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for our designers to present their work, and also a thank you to the New Institute for supporting financially this program as well. Maybe it's nice to know that the Wim Crowell Institute will have its own professor, a special chair in graphic design and visual culture at the University of Amsterdam, the Faculty of Humanities, soon. And like I said, if you're watching through Zoom, you can have a chat with the designers in the Zoom conversation as well. That will last for 30 more minutes. Thanks again, and hopefully I'll see you at the next edition. Bye-bye.